Great. Hi, everybody, and welcome. We're just going to give one more minute as I think a few more people will be joining. So just one more minute and then we'll get started. Thank you. Great. So I think some more people will be joining, but in the interest of time, I suggest we get started. So I'm Juliet Parker, and I'm the director of ALNAP, the Learning Network for the Humanitarian Sector. And I'm delighted to welcome you to this HNPW session, Sustaining Learning in Lean Times, Challenges and Opportunities for Evaluations in Humanitarian Contexts. So, quite apart from the extraordinary events of the last 3 days, we've all been experiencing in different ways the tough reality of the prioritization decisions that humanitarian organizations are having to make in the face of the changing financial situation in the sector. And today's session is designed to offer us the opportunity to share and reflect on how these changes are affecting the evaluation world, what we stand to lose and what we may stand to gain. So in the discussion today, I'm delighted to be joined by 4 excellent contributors who bring a wealth of experience and perspectives to the discussion. My colleague Sarah Gharbi is a research fellow at ALNAP. She's the co-author of our most recent evaluation guide on adapting the OECD criteria for the evaluation of humanitarian action, and she leads ALNAP's M&E work. Helen Jouillard is the director of QIAID, as well as lecturer at Saint Pau and a PhD researcher at Sussex. Helen is a board member of the French Evaluation Society. She engaged in evaluations for the past 17 years and was part of ALNAP's OECD Guide Advisory Group. Also, Zaki Ullah is CEO at Glow Consultants. He's an evaluation specialist with over 15 years of experience and more than 60 evaluation and learning assignments. He was part of the ALNAP OECD Guide Reference Group. He has Masters of Science in Management and Implementation of Development Projects from the University of Manchester in the UK. And Ali Bazurikov is the chief of OCHA's Evaluation and Oversight section and is responsible for managing the section's evaluations and oversight portfolio. He also serves as chair of the Interagency Humanitarian Evaluation Steering Group. He's a medical doctor and holds a master's degree in public health from Boston University. So thank you all very much for joining us for the discussion today. This session is going to be 60 minutes long, and I absolutely promise we will finish on time. We're going to hear from our speakers first, and there will then be an opportunity for questions from you all. But please do share comments and questions in the chat throughout the session. We're particularly interested to hear how you're experiencing the changes and the implications that you see starting to emerge. So do please contribute to the conversation. And with that, I'm delighted to hand over to my colleague Sarah for some opening reflections to get us going.
Thank you so much, Juliet. Hi, everyone. I'm very pleased to be with you today to tackle and explore this very interesting topic. As Juliet mentioned, I am one of 3 co-authors of ALNAP's latest evaluation guide, adapting the OECD criteria for the evaluation of humanitarian action. You will find the link to the guide in the chat. The guide was largely developed and written before the current funding constraints hit the humanitarian system, but one of its key principles, the thoughtful and utility-focused use of evaluation criteria, is more relevant than ever. Indeed, at ALNAP, we continuously encourage evaluation practitioners, both commissioners and evaluators, to put utility at the forefront of the evaluation process. When it comes to applying evaluation criteria, we do not recommend using the list of criteria in our guide as a rigid checklist. Quite the contrary, we recommend a thoughtful and a flexible approach to evaluation criteria. The needs of the evaluation users should guide the selection of evaluation criteria and evaluation questions. Of course, the rigid application of criteria leading to an overload of evaluation questions is a tale as old as time in evaluation practice. This impacts the quality and use of evaluations, which ultimately has an impact on what we can learn from them. The question is, what can we as evaluation practitioners do in the current funding environment to continue enhancing the quality and use of evaluations to support learning and accountability in the humanitarian sector? It is too early to have a clear and comprehensive picture of what consequences the funding constraints will have on humanitarian evaluation practice. But when I've spoken to ALNAP members and other evaluation stakeholders, some issues are emerging. For example, less resources for individual evaluations might mean less work days for evaluators, less funds for travel to affected contexts, less willingness to pay for experienced evaluators. This occurs while the scope of evaluations is maintained. The same number of questions are expected to be answered by a smaller and more inexperienced team. We're also hearing of ALNAP members, needing to drastically downsize their M&E or meal teams, with more responsibilities falling on program or operational staff. And perhaps most seriously of all, we're hearing about increasing pressure on evaluators to only include positive results in evaluations, omitting what has not worked as organizations fear repercussions and termination of support from donors more than ever. These issues obviously present a certain number of risks for evaluation practice moving forward. If the scope of evaluation is not adapted to the resources available, we risk ending up with evaluations of poor quality that are perceived as even more of a tick-the-box exercise. If commissioners insist on using all the criteria in an evaluation and cannot provide enough resources to the process, the quality will suffer. Furthermore, if meal teams are substantially reduced within organizations that commission evaluations, there could be a risk of weaker evaluation processes, from weaker terms of references all the way to weaker follow-up. And all of this will lead to decreased learning. This is also the risk with increasing pressure on evaluators to skew evaluation results toward the positive. How can we learn and how can we be accountable if we don't look at what did not work? However, in the spirit of a half glass full, there could also be opportunities with the new funding environment. Perhaps we will see more joint evaluations as agencies have fewer resources for evaluations available. This could really enhance interagency learning, and if I may be optimistic, increase the chances of learning and accountability at system level. The new funding restrictions might also mean greater opportunities for local evaluators. If commissioners within the international humanitarian system are forced to abandon the traditional and often biased view, the so-called international evaluators are more competent because they can't afford to fly them halfway across the world, could it mean that they'll be more open to locally led evaluation teams? My sincere hope is that in these times of hyper-prioritization, we will be able to, in the humanitarian evaluation community, to make better and more strategic decisions for evaluations. Let us not evaluate everything. Let us not use all the evaluation criteria in a single evaluation. Let us do more focused and useful evaluations. If resources for evaluations are constrained, let us really think about what we need to know. Let us work together, joining up forces for collective learning. And let us always put affected people at the center. With that, I will hand over to Juliette. I very much look forward to hearing the panel discussion. Thank you.
Great. Thank you very much, Sarah, for those opening thoughts. So things are definitely changing. We know that, and we are all having to adapt in different ways. But I'd like to first go to Zaki. How are you seeing changes to approach an evaluation happening, given the resource changes that we're experiencing?
Thank you very much, Juliet, and thank you very much, Sarah, for quite elaborative setup scene for the discussion, and welcome everyone to this session. It's an interesting and important question. What we are seeing is, like, I mean, if it's not reducing in the dollar terms, effectively the resources available for the evaluations, definitely what we see on the ground is reducing in terms of it's not taking into account the inflation that what we have seen, especially after the COVID situation. So pretty much the same resources that would have been available 10 years ago for a similar set of evaluation exercise that we do these days, pretty much those resources are stagnant. So in reality, these resources are much less for the same amount of work that we were supposed to do a few years back. So that's pretty clear from our experiences on the field. The second important aspect that what we have seen in the last few years, a lot of or the number of evaluations responsibilities are passed on to the local actors now, which is quite good in a sense for strengthening the localization. But the dilemma is that these are not accompanied with sufficient or equivalent resources that the international organization would have used for a similar sort of exercise. So that's another dilemma that we are seeing on the ground. So on one aspect, it's good. The responsibility or the powers are given to the local actors, but not with the adequate resources, which is quite unfortunate. The other aspect I would bring into to the discussion is the uh, clubbing together a few other things with the evaluation. This is a practice that we have seen in the recent past, especially when it comes to the communication aspect. What we have seen is with the same resources, with the organizations trying to do more with the limited resources available. So they would ask you that, okay, this is the evaluation, but after the evaluation, we need to get some sort of communication products out of it and a number of products. So it means effectively the actual resources available for the evaluation are reduced because the commissioning organization wants to do with the little money. Now, I mean, I can talk more that how it is then affecting the entire evaluations, the quality of it, and then what it means for the sector as a whole. But I'm pretty sure there will be more opportunity for me to come back and speak about them. So over to you, Juliet.
Thank you. Yes, we'll definitely be talking about that. So definitely a reduction in resources and this shift towards use of more local and national evaluators, but not necessarily with the resources to accompany that. Helen, how does that resonate with you? Are you seeing similar things?
Yeah, thanks a lot, Juliet, and very much aligned with what Saki highlighted, because we've seen that evaluation resources are indeed being reduced, which translate first in a reduction of the number of evaluation being conducted, but also second in a reduction of the resources available for those going ahead. But in parallel, though, the learning needs are increasing because organizations faced with the context, they need to make decisions and they need to be making decisions swiftly, and they also need those decisions to be evidence-based. And so the famous doing more with less, which I think every humanitarian is very tired of, is also pretty much what we are seeing at the moment. And maybe to also, as Sarah, see the glass half full, I think that as evaluator, we do have a responsibility to look at the evaluative process, to make it a learning process, because the key learning that emerged from evaluation does not and should not take place when the user read the final reports further, a couple of months further down the line. And so leveraging knowledge during the evaluation process is something that should be deliberate. And if I may share an additional reflection, is one way to do so, there are many ways that we can do so, but is also to reflect a little bit as to what is it we call rigorous evidence and what is it we call useful evaluative product, and therefore solid ground for decision making. Because there is, in addition to the reduction of funding, there is another paradoxical trend in the sector, which I call a randomista push, meaning calling rigorous evaluation those that are conducting using specific methods, right? So experimental or quasi-experimental methods. And these are, in my social scientist opinions, quite often by design ill-suited to the humanitarian sector, because they don't necessarily open the black box of what works, why, for whom. And so the term rigor, to go back to your point, Sarah made, is sometimes used to dismiss finding that now may not be the right time for an organization to hear. Because if organizations are under strain, now may not be the best time to be highly critical, because those critiques could then be backfiring to humanitarian organization and be used to reduce even more the humanitarian space. And so what do we do with that as evaluator? I think is to also place focus on learning during the evaluation process, learning that happen internally, but yet that is brought by an evaluator with an external perspective. And so I think there is a lot to draw from beyond the evaluation space from qualitative and participatory researchers, which may be something that we can draw from right now.
Yeah, great. Thank you very much. Some reflections on how to make best use of the process, but also the potential implications on the quality of the findings or the usability of the findings or the accuracy of the findings, which I'm sure will come up later. Ali, how about you? How are you seeing things?
Thank you, Juliet. So I'll speak from the perspective of IHEs, the Interagency Humanitarian Evaluations, as a special time. But it's still experiencing the same effects of the more constrained budget environment. Humanitarian evaluations are part of the humanitarian program cycle, and so we're experiencing the same problems as the rest of the sector. And it's not only the funding constraints, it's also a growing skepticism over humanitarian enterprise more generally. There's at least at the intergovernmental level, there seems to be less faith in the collective enterprise and the global solidarity. So it all comes together, I would say. So definitely there are fewer resources across the humanitarian sector. In OCHA, we probably had somewhat average staffing cuts across the sector, like around 20%. I know some organizations experienced a lot more budget cuts, but in terms of cash available to hire independent consultant has been significantly more reduced than staffing. So we have less staff, but even less money to do the independent evaluations. But when it comes to the humanitarian, interagency humanitarian evaluations, we see a similar trend. There are fewer money to contribute to the IHEs. But what we've noticed is that actually we have more agencies contributing, but contributing smaller amounts. And then we also see there are fewer contributions that are earmarked. We run a special account for the interagency evaluations. Agencies can deposit money for the future evaluation. So we're seeing less of that. But I also see that there is more interest in doing joint and interagency evaluations, as it also a good funding model. Yeah, not every agency can afford to do an evaluation of their major response and major crisis. And so they are looking for the ways to increase complementarity. So the interagency evaluations seem to enjoy that, the interest. At the same time, of course, every agency that contributes money to collective rather to their own agency evaluations is interested in seeing more results from it. They need to, they're putting pressure on us, both internally within our steering group, but also externally to show that these evaluations do make a difference. So this is a combined pressure from every direction, I would say. And to me, this started even before the funding crisis, because there were quite a large number of the scale-up emergencies that we tended to focus on, and our ability to undertake IHEs for each one of those was already declining. So the group had already started working on the prioritization criteria, which we developed as a part of the revision of the IHE process guidelines. And so we have a pretty good model on how to decide on what is most important, how we should be more selective. So no more automatically triggered IHEs. We take the automatic trigger of the scale up into account, but it's a signal for consideration, but not a signal. It does not mean we will automatically do that. So to me, as like any crisis, it's forces us to rethink strategically how to produce maybe more focused, leaner, but more impactful evaluation. I'll stop here.
Thank you very much. Yes, more pressure to justify evaluations and to justify that investment, I guess we have to be super aware of. And the interesting potential increase in interest in joint evaluations, which wouldn't necessarily be a bad thing, at least in ALNAP's opinion. But really interested to hear then from our contributors, with all the resource constraints and the shifts that are happening, do you think there might be pressure to have fewer evaluations? And if so, how should we handle that? Is that necessarily a bad thing? Although it would hurt, of course, but how would we best handle that? Zaki, I wondered if you have any comments. And also just a note, I'm delighted to see so many people have joined. And also I can see a lot of evaluators and evaluation commissioners listening in. Please do share your experiences, how you're finding this shift and what you're seeing in the chat. We'd be delighted to hear from you. Zaki, over to you.
Thanks, Juliet. So the purpose of the evaluation was for learning, that was the purpose, or that is the purpose. So then definitely if we are not learning enough because of the resource constraint, this is not a good thing if the numbers are reducing. So this is my point number one. The second point I want to share is the sort of accountability on part of the implementing organizations of the projects. So if there is no requirement of, let's say, independent evaluations of the projects or evaluation of the projects, then it's also kind of contributing like negatively or affecting that accountability aspect as well. So if we are removing the requirements of the evaluations from the projects because of funding constraints, we need to then balance this accountability aspect somehow in our funding modality. Because I think these evaluations were also, besides bringing in learnings, this was also kind of also contributing to that accountability aspect as well. Finally, okay, if the quantity is less, but we focus more on the quality, maybe then I'm just now giving you the other perspective. So if we can have a better quality of evaluations, though reduced number, I think we can maybe balance it out to some extent. But what we are seeing in practice is that that's not the case. Like one, the numbers are reduced. The second, the one which are happening for these, the resources are not sufficiently provided. So at least if we can then provide sufficient resources for those reduced number of evaluations, maybe it will balance out a little bit. And also to go for wider disseminations of the learnings, as we are doing it today for speaking about or talking about on discussing one of the topic. If we bring those evaluation and research findings to the larger audience using through the use of the technology and the platforms as the one we are using today, I think this will also have some benefit. If the numbers are reduced, we can, with the quality of products and better dissemination, I think we can balance it out a bit. Thank you.
Thank you. So perhaps focusing on protecting the quality of evaluations rather than the number of evaluations might be one of our rallying calls. Ellen, thoughts from you? Oh, you're on mute. Yeah.
Yeah, and I think that that question also resonates with the point Ali made about if we need to demonstrate the value of evaluation, right? Especially if we get less evaluation. But maybe the question here is value for whom, right? Because ultimately an evaluation is only as good as it is being properly scoped. Because if especially if an evaluation is commissioned, right? As a consultant, and I'm sorry to bring you in that same boat, Zaki, but we are only answering the question we're being asked to answer, with, of course, some wiggle room to tweak the question. But what tend to happen is that evaluation questions are decided centrally for larger, maybe multi-country or multi-program evaluation. And the evaluation criteria, which are at the core of the guides we all contributed to here, but those evaluation criteria, as opposed to be used as guides to answer the evaluation question, then they became the lower denominator of evaluation questions. And so this is almost being the lower denominator, I don't think is a very nice destiny for those evaluation criteria. So I think we need to really focus on to whom do we want to bring value from the evaluation. And it's not about putting or blaming evaluation as not being good or not, but it's also first thinking of the scope and what is it we want to use it for. And maybe something about what is at risk, because I don't think that evaluation practice as in methods is necessarily under threat, because those are being more and more codified. I think Ali mentioned about process guidelines for IHE, for example. But there are two things that I wanted to bring forward that I think are very important those days. Is what is at threat is our own memory, which evaluation rely a lot on. And so Humanitarian Archive is definitely under threat currently for a couple of reasons. A decrease of funding, but also sometimes specific decision. And I'm sure everyone will remember how we felt when we thought that HughesNet was actually winding down. This would have had an impact on evaluation, but also far beyond. And so this we need to, as evaluator and researcher overall, need to be quite aware of, that what the system is at risk of is losing its own memory and therefore capacity for accountability, because evaluation is a tool that can be used for accountability. But if we don't have memory or archive to base our evaluation on, then the accountability purpose will disappear. And something as well is that data loss is not neutral, right? And I mean, knowledge creation isn't either. But I think evaluators have a responsibility to keep in mind that data is a form of power. And so the fact that there is potentially less evaluation means something in terms of in terms of how it shapes narrative of crisis, right? And evaluation have a role to play as long as they are published as a repository of humanitarian response over time. And exercises such as the interagency humanitarian evaluation that Ali mentioned are a good example of that for those organizations who are part of the YASC. And the last thing that I wanted to highlight, which I think we may lose or that is at risk, is the future of evaluation, with less and less opportunity for young and emerging evaluators to engage. And this is mostly as a result of resource limitation, but also with the change in technology and the use of AI. And so there's definitely a responsibility for evaluator to reflect on how not to make themselves redundant, especially if there is a trend to have fewer evaluations. So what is it we can bring as human being that is not meaningless data crunching?
Thank you, Helen. There was a lot in there. Great, thank you very much. I'll pass to Ali. Over to you.
Thank you, Juliet. Yeah, and like Helen said, that we may lose memory, and to me, when it comes to IHEs, I believe this is one of their functions that we don't talk very often about, because this is the only historic record, if you like, of collective response to any major emergency of the past. If you want to go and check how we responded to say Mozambique, where would you go? I mean, you would that's what you would want to have if you wanted to look at trends across many years and how the humanitarian practice has evolved. That would be your best reference. So to me, having fewer IHEs, we already don't have that many of them. We have about 2 per year as our kind of baseline plan. And I think going with less will create even more gaps. in our memory, but also gaps in accountability. So to me, the value for home question that Helen is asking is that, there are our immediate clients here are the members of ISC, but I think being a public good, they're also an asset. They create a value for any humanitarian network that responding at the national level. If you live in one country and you want to learn how humanitarian actors responded in another, again, where would you find this? This is where you would go and look for the lesson. To me, therefore the crisis is also an opportunity to maybe not so much to fight back for the resources to do more of the evaluations, but to do better ones. And by that I mean not necessarily the quality of the evaluations, which have improved a lot over the past several decades. The evaluation practice has improved, but it is more, how do we have more impactful evaluations that maybe focus on a fewer things, but have a catalytic effect on the progress that we are trying to make. Because to me, and I'm speaking here about IHEs, while we are focusing on examining a response, what we always have to keep in mind is how do we want the lessons from this response to inform the future responses, and how the lessons from current response can help us to advance the humanitarian reforms. And to me, we need to be better connected to what's happening around us, to the context in which we operate. We don't need to be involved in politics ourselves, but we need to understand it and the power dynamic that is being played. So to be more strategic about with whom we work on this, with whom we engage on these evaluations, at what time do we involve with them? So to me, it's to be smart about it, if you like. As I say, we don't need to do anything wrong, but we need to understand and find opportunities in the politics around us, but also in understanding the context in which humanitarian, and I'm speaking about humanitarian here, actors operate. So that to me would help to make evaluations more impactful, and even and without focusing on any single client. There may be a constellations of clients, maybe with one or two, your primary one, but you may actually affect change through a stakeholder that you maybe did not primarily focus on. But it may help to improve maybe not the current response, but the future response. Over to you, Julia.
Great, thank you very much. And also thanks to everyone listening in who's submitting their comments and questions. We'll definitely be having time to get some of those questions as well. And I very much like Ali's emphasis on being more impactful and recognizing those catalytic moments or stakeholders, and how to be more smarter about using evaluation or framing evaluation around those opportunities. Zaki, I wanted to come back to you. Your point earlier, well, you're welcome to talk about anything that you want to talk about, but I was particularly interested from the perspective of a national consultancy. And there's a couple of questions here, comments about what might be seen as the traditional extractivism of evaluative processes and the kind of need for information to flow up. And you referred earlier to a potential push towards using more local and national evaluators, though not necessarily with the resources. And I was interested to hear more about what do you think we have to potentially lose or gain around this change moment?
Thanks, Juliet. I think more from the operational perspective, from the field perspective regarding the evaluations. I think with this environment, with this, I mean, the push for do more with less sort of resources. In the evaluation perspective, what we fear is that it will potentially compromise the robustness of the evaluation designs. And if you compromise the evaluation designs, definitely then it will affect the findings and the results and the recommendations you are making based on that particular evaluation or research. So, because I mean, one of the key aspect for the evaluation is the data, and the data. I mean, it requires significant resources of the total pie available for evaluation. So, there's kind of what we have seen from the field from operational perspective, that cutting down on the consultations, on the data collection sort of events. So one, it will like compromising the robustness of the designs if we are taking that path. Second, which is even more important, is because that data collection mostly is happening with the project beneficiaries or with the communities. So you are cutting down on your interaction as an evaluator with the communities. So maybe you are then missing that important perspective or a sufficient in appropriate way when you are triangulating the information from other sources and then making some kind of findings and recommendation based on it. So that's an important aspect we need to be careful of, that maybe we want to save some resources by maybe not interacting enough with the communities, but then maybe it is like, I mean, that the findings and the recommendations are not reflective of the communities in the field. So this is primarily what we see, and we fear that maybe this is going to happen in this situation unless we do rationalize our TORs as a commissioning organization. We really assess that what we actually want to learn from that particular evaluation exercise, because what traditionally was happening, and you guys have worked on the dark criteria and everything. So pretty much, I mean, taking everything whatever is listed there and all the criterias, all the leading questions, and then even adding up 20 more. So because the more you add, the more probably you would need resources to answer those questions, more man days required to do that research. So I think this is also, I mean, something needs to be done on the commissioning agency as well, that what actually they want, because the resources are less. Maybe historically there were more resources. There was like, I mean, they could wish for many things to learn from one exercise. Now I think it's time that they also cut down on their wish list and actually focus on what is important to learn. Thank you.
Thank you so much. That's really interesting. And yeah, struck particularly by your first point. We mustn't compromise on engaging sufficiently with the primary stakeholders, who are and should always be the community members. And that mustn't be, cost cut. Also, just reading through some of the questions, like the examples of number of terms of reference with 35 plus evaluation questions, and that comes up a few times. How are we being realistic about the scope of what we can actually look at and commission in any one evaluative process? So yes, a sad recognition of that one. Helen, maybe I can pass to you. What would you like how would you like to see evaluation practice evolving and using this moment of change to end up in a better, albeit a more resource constrained way?
Thanks. It's across what Zaki said and Ali, as well as Sarah in the opening remark, it seems there is a consensus towards agility, right? So it's to say that there is maybe no recipe, and although there's been quite a lot of efforts for more formalization, codification process as a way to increase the quality of evaluation, maybe now is the time to also detach ourselves from it slightly, so we could really ask and meaningfully answer question about, okay, evaluation for whom, what's the added value of the exercise, and how could we take as much advantage of the the evaluative process for learning as for the final product. And this product doesn't necessarily need to be a very long evaluation report that comes in a couple of months after the data collection was done. And I would like to also build on what was mentioned in the chat about why are we focusing on evaluation as opposed to look at M&E system as a whole. Maybe the straightforward answer is to say that, okay, evaluation is the event title. So we were, again, doing as we were told, but also because when we speak about M&E, and M&E system to inform and guide public policy overall, the M always tend to take precedence over the E. And so I think monitoring is key, and no evaluator would say otherwise to guide program, but monitoring doesn't necessarily bring critical reflection on program design. And this capacity to take a step back from implementation to reflect on how the program or how the response or how the collaboration was framed in the first place is one of the key added value that evaluation could bring and could bring at that particular moment. But we also need, and this go back to your question about how could this evolve, is to really be truly user-centered as opposed to be process-focused. Not to say that the two always oppose each other, but it's really to help answer the question those closer to the program intend to answer. And if those questions are 35 questions, that's normal. And maybe it's then the evaluator responsibility to frame them in a way that is answerable across one exercise. But it's to be sure that those questions are the ones that are really useful. And again, I think it's also about stretching across different methods, evaluation being more forward-looking. There is a big demand for this. So you have country teams that have a challenge with their strategic exercise, and they would like to have an evaluator helping them with that. So evaluation is not necessarily designed for this, but evaluators have put in place learning steps and learning process that could facilitate and help country team answer those questions themselves. So my take here is to think about evaluators as knowledge broker, but brokering this knowledge for the user, right? And not the user being those who are going to be closer to the program. Crisis affected household program staff and so on. And the second thing is very much aligned with that, is to think about how this learning can take place, and yeah, to be a bit more creative, leveraging knowledge during the evaluation process as being deliberate, and not have this traditional inception phase during the inception reports, collecting data, and then you analyze the data, you write the report, and you get the findings at the end of it, because a lot can happen during the process. And I had mentioned before that AI and technology in general may be a threat for young and emerging evaluator, but they are also those technology are also definitely opportunity to make this learning happen as we go. So I think that's how I would like evaluation practice to evolve in the next few years, is to get more matured and realize that standardization, codification has happened. We can build on this to then be more flexible, so that learning can take place throughout all the process.
Thank you so much. Yeah, being more user-centered, not process-focused. Someone has written in the chat about finding the questions that matter. And yeah, thinking about evaluators as knowledge brokers for those closest to the program. Thank you. Ali, how would you like to see this moment influence a more positive move forward for the evaluation community?
I see it as an opportunity, and what I'm going to say still would have applied even if we had no funding crisis at all. And I'm speaking here from commissioner point of view. what I always found was not that the evaluations sometimes not delivering is that while answering the question of pointing to a problem, sometimes it just leaves you with more questions sometimes that the evaluation can tell you what's not working, but they are not saying why this is not working, and maybe it wasn't in the original list of evaluation questions, but I think that's always like we are where we need to change that and to be able to provide decision makers with decision advantage, if you like. So not only to point to a problem, especially if it's a recurrent problem, but also to help to understand better why the certain problem keeps reoccurring again and again, so that the progress can be made. I also would, as I said, that both those who are commissioning evaluations and those who are conducting them need to better understand the context in which we operate, because that way we can have more relevant conversations with the key stakeholders, but also make more relevant evaluations with higher chance of impact. And third, I would say that evaluation community needs to be more involved in what's happening around us. A conversation about the humanitarian reforms, for example, in our case. Yeah, to me, there's a big gap there. There are policy people, operational people that are discussing the humanitarian reform, and then we evaluators who are like, yeah, call us to assess your progress later on. I will be happy to do that. But to me, there's a chance for evaluators to be involved a lot more and to help the humanitarian system to think, because evaluators are critical thinkers. And I think it's a huge asset to a shrinking humanitarian sector. I think we need more brain power in the sector, but more and a smarter way of dealing with problems that we keep seeing again and again. And to me, evaluations are part of the evidence decision making, I don't know, ecosystem. Let me just make up a word here. But so it's all linked up. You can't have a good evaluation or evaluation friendly environment if the decisions are not made based on evidence. Doesn't matter if the evaluation points to generates good evidence. If the decision makers are not set up to use evidence to make decisions, that's not going to be useful. So overemphasizing the quality of evaluations would not help. To me, it's understanding who is making decisions when and how, and helping to create that culture of evidence, especially in the current environment in the world where there is more and more skepticism over expertise, over evidence, to politicians more and more making decisions based on their intuitions, and I'm afraid that also applies to some leadership of our organizations as well. So taking the humanitarian sector as an example, I would love evaluators time to time to meet with those who are leading humanitarian reform and have a conversation, so that they can hear from each other, educate one another, and that would help practitioners, but also evaluators. And this is what ALNAP is also doing. So I know this is why your role, ALNAP, is ever more important in this environment. So to me, working with the IEC, I would love IEC to have a long-term strategy so that our evaluations can also focus on that long-term strategy. There is none at the moment. There is an agenda for humanitarian reform, but there is no good plan that we can follow, that we can plan along assessing. We would love to have ISC to have a learning strategy, so that we could have a dialogue with them around that and be able to help them to learn, but it doesn't exist. So, and also the monitoring. I would love to see more connection between what the IEC is trying to do to improve monitoring, so that this would help us to produce better evaluations. Most of the IHs we produce do flag gaps in data. And so we just live because we are not able to answer certain questions because the data is not there, because monitoring systems are too weak. They're often agency specific and there's very little at the collective level. So those things, we need to work with those who are working on those problems to create a feeling that we are all we are together in this. And the purpose is to make best use of the resources for the maximum impact for the people we work. Over to you, Julie.
Thank you very much. That's so interesting. I am very conscious of time and the number of excellent comments that are being made in the chat, and trying to fish out some of the key points. There's a very healthy challenge to ALNAP in there. The ALNAP should harvest what evaluation should be. So one thing I just wanted to say before I hand back to our panelists is we are very aware that we've got this shift in the learning landscape that's happening, and really trying to balance valuing and respecting and preserving the knowledge that has come before, whilst recognizing that the knowledge architecture that we have isn't the knowledge architecture that we need to have for the future. It must evolve and change. And the same as the conversations going on in the operational side of the sector applies absolutely to the knowledge and evaluation and learning part of the sector as well. And how do we actually, and this is going to be my last question to the panelists before we close, someone else also mentioned, this need for a shift in mindset. There's loads of good, progressive approaches being practiced across the sector, but how do we enable the shift in mindset? And it's the same discussion that's going on in the operational side as well. How do we enable that shift in mindset so that we are better able to evolve to a knowledge architecture and approaches that are fit for the future? Shortly, one of my colleagues will also put a link into the work that ALNAP's doing on the new learning landscape, an open invitation to everybody to please engage, because we want to really create a collective conversation about what needs to change and how we can move forward. But back to my colleagues, panelists, Zaki, how do we enable that shift in mindset in order to be able to really capitalize on what we know the shifts are that we need to make as a sector?
Thanks, Juliet. And I'm also mindful of the time, so I'll keep my response pretty precise. I think use of technology, whether it's like in different forms of different aspects of the evaluations, even the use of AI. I know it's an aspect many people don't like it at all, but I think we as a sector are resisting it. We need to come up with good policies, guidelines, and around the use of AI. It's a sort of a naughty friend, so you need to know how to use it. But if you use it professionally, it can really bring a lot of efficiency, because we need to adopt as a sector this situation of the funding constraint. It doesn't look like that it will go away. Rather, as a sector, we have to adopt. So some adaptation needs to be done by the evaluator, and some from the commissioning organization, as already mentioned earlier, on focusing much more on the TURs, what exactly they need and what actually they need. Not a wish list and not a big shopping list. So that's another aspect, more concise, to the point, TURs, what is needed for that particular assignment or evaluation. Thirdly, I mean, whatever evaluation products are coming in, we as a sector should be able to learn from those learnings. So the platforms like this, we have to disseminate that information. engage people in that learning. So, I mean, the learnings can be spread quite widely. So even if there are lesser number of evaluations or researches, I mean, the impact of them could be, I mean, wide reaching. So I'll just stop here. Those 3 points from me. Over to you.
Great. Thank you very much. Hélène, over to you. Same question.
Yeah. So I think we need to acknowledge that a shift of mindset will always be more challenging than creating a tool, producing a guidance, or even building an infrastructure, right? So if we are aiming to shift the mindset and become knowledge advocates or evaluation advocates, I think at some point we'll need to address the elephant in the room that you can't be an advocate and be seen as entirely neutral and objective. So it's also about joining forces to agree on what's the direction for knowledge creation in the humanitarian sector. And I think there will be some thorny issue, right, about who's funding evaluation, what's their knowledge agenda, and basically who the knowledge is created for. So maybe it's more of a researcher type of agenda, but it's also about the lay of the land. And I think the network that ALNAP represents is also an opportunity, because to be able to conduct this mapping, there will be a need for some trust in between those commissioning, those conducting evaluation that continue to be built, so that together we can see how we leverage technology. How do we actually engage into a learning agenda? Yeah, some of the principles for evaluation, such as transparency and replicability, will need to, I think, could be good guide, good compass to do that. And I see Silva's message about what is wrong with AI. So I don't think we need guideline. I'm very much in agreement with this, but we definitely need transparency, because this is how you build trust, right? So I think there is nothing wrong with evaluator using AI, but it's just about being transparent, that you've actually leveraged the power of technology, and that maybe you free up some time to do something more. So yeah, trust and transparency as the way forward. That sounds very wishful thinking, but that's my agenda.
I'm sure we will work on it. Ali, final word to you. Shifts in mindset or anything else you want to pick up on?
Yeah, shifting mindset. I wish I knew the answer, one answer to that. But I think like any system to me is not defined by the mistakes that it makes, but by the reactions to these mistakes. And I think this is what we are observing right now in real time. So to me, this is we should be more receptive to critical feedback as a commissioners, as evaluators, as operational people. So that culture change to a critique that we receive is an opportunity to improve and do things better. I think that's a perennial problem. This defensiveness, for all the stakeholders. That I think should change. How, I'm not sure, but maybe the answer is in we can find the answer if we try to invest more in understanding incentives for each stakeholders, the perspectives, and also maybe the governance of the whole sector in which we operate. So if we understand those things better, maybe we can reduce the resistance to a critical feedback and create a demand for it, in fact. So something along the line, and this is where ALNAP can definitely help.
Great. Thank you, everybody, very much. Another good challenge for ALNAP. Love it. We'll embrace that one. Thank you, everybody, very much for all your contributions, including in the chat. We're going to save the chat. I'm very aware that we didn't get to all the questions and comments, but what we would like to do is not lose those and take them online. And please do follow #NewLearningLandscapes, where we will be using that as a platform to keep this conversation going. Also, do follow us on your socials, sign up to our monthly bulletin and the M&E list, and do keep an eye on ALNAP's other HNPW events, as well as everybody else's. Such a good opportunity for learning all round. Thank you, everybody, very much for your contributions, particularly to our panelists and contributors. It's been a real pleasure, and I look forward to keeping in touch. Thank you.